Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Well, hello there, and welcome to The Foretop, a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. On today's show, we will nosh on 3 courses. First, lusting for lagers. Next, fast forward for fast casual dining. And for our third course, waging war on the minimum wage. Our esteemed panelists here in the studios of Oregon Public Broadcasting are Erin DeJesus, reports editor at eater.com. Hey, Erin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Jeff Alworth, author of The Beer Bible and Cider Made Simple and co-host of the Beervana podcast. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
And Lucy Burningham, a certified Cicerone travel writer and the author of 2 books on beer. Hey, Lucy.
Hey.
Okay, guys, let's bite into our first course, lusting for lagers. For years, American microbrewers appear to be playing a game of one-upsmanship, turbo-loading their beers with as much hops and flavor as possible. But today, craft breweries are dialing it back. The beers of the moment are light, refreshing lagers and also pilsners. Lucy Burningham, you're our certified Cicerone. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Well, this is an exciting trend, you guys. Basically, the craft brewer palate is expanding and changing. Instead of being so attached to these super hoppy IPAs, people want to try different styles of beers, and brewers are responding to that, making these wonderful lagers, some of which are pilsners. And just to clarify, we are not talking about macro lagers, which are the best-selling beer styles in America and probably will be for the foreseeable future. So, that's Budweiser, Coors. So we're talking about sort of the smaller breweries and what they're doing with lagers. And I'm curious if you guys think people are giving up IPAs for these types of lagers.
Well, this is Jeff. I think probably people know that. I think that this might also have something to do with the food scene. Because here in Portland, I noticed that one of the things that was happening is a lot of the lagers that were being brewed were appearing in restaurants, and I think that has to do with the chefs who like these highly effervescent, crisp beers with gentle malt and gentle hops that complement the food very nicely and don't overwhelm it. With an IPA, you bludgeon the meal. And I was starting to see at nicer restaurants there would always seem like be a Helles or a Pilsner or some kind of light lager there as a choice. And it's one of the things when I talk to people, what should I pair food with? Well, if you've got a Helles or a Pilsner or a Saison also works well. You can work with almost anything, and I think chefs were figuring that out. And I noticed that there was a kind of resonance between the brewers and the chefs there.
This is so interesting to me because it's such a similar conversation to what's going on with wine. For so many years, the wines that were getting all the attention were the ones that had the most concentrated flavor and the most oak. And just these past few years, it's been all about dialing it back. It's almost been like a market correction with, as you said, Jeff, chefs and people who really are interested in pairing wine with food saying, wait a minute, these wines are overwhelming the food. Let's go back and get something lighter, kind of like a Pinot Noir or a Riesling that really lets the food shine. Erin, have you been seeing this trend going on in restaurants?
Absolutely, and I love it because as a drinker, and to say this in the Pacific Northwest makes you kind of a pariah, but I am not a fan of the super hoppy IPA. And it used to be a couple years ago, you felt a little bit of shame admitting that to people, especially to people in the beer industry. And now I think people are just more welcome to the idea that maybe you do not want to drink this very, to me anyway, on my palate, very heavy beer along with your meal. Let's give you some alternative options. So as a drinker, I've been absolutely loving it.
You can stay in the Pacific Northwest, Erin.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll keep you here.
Well, it's so outdoorsy here in the Northwest. I feel like after you're done with a day of, surfing or skiing or whatever, you just want a lager. You don't want some big hoppy beer, do you guys?
Well, it depends on my mood. I can go for the big hoppy beers once in a while. I kind of want to give a shout out to brewers because these beer styles are really hard to make. There are a lot of different kinds of lagers, and they require a lot of technical finesse, and you can't really hide behind anything when you're making a good lager. So I think brewers are kind of stepping up their game as craft brewers and chefs are asking for these different kinds of beers.
They're also a platform for your palate to become more sophisticated. I think these two trends go hand in hand because the big IPA, the flavors are so intense. It's like listening to, Slayer or something. If you want to really understand music, you got to listen to something a little bit more delicate. There's more going on, and that's what it's like with lagers. You can actually taste the interplay with the malt and the hops, and kind of let the flavors emerge. There's space there. So I think in a way, the people who appreciate lagers, light lagers that are not so flavor intense, may actually be developing a sense of nuance in their palate, and that's a good thing.
One question I've always had, and I would love to ask the two of you, Lucy and Jeff, right now, is there a seasonality associated with beer the same way there is with produce and other food items?
Definitely. And historically, brewers made beer with the seasons before there was refrigeration. So that's kind of the origin of it. They'd make some beers in the spring that were meant for fall. They really were paying attention to the temperatures and how they affected fermentation.
Yeah, and there's a quality of the sense of the beer and the sense of the climate kind of matter. So, if you got an imperial stout, you really don't want to be drinking that on a hot summer day on the back porch. That's like a winter beer. You want something crisp and light, and in the fall you want something a little bit stronger, a little bit crisper. Same with the spring. Winter very heavy, and summer very light.
Interesting. So it's not just a market force thing; it's an actual ingredient driven.
Yeah, long predates the market. So.
It's very cool.
People follow the seasons.
Can I just make a couple more wine comparisons, because I just find this so interesting. First of all, what you were saying, Jeff, about the lighter style, it kind of showing that you have a more sophisticated or nuanced palate. That's same is true for wine. People say, again, wines like Riesling that are very delicate are the ones that, as you were saying, Lucy, show the skill of the winemaker, because it's so kind of bell clear, and also the discernment of the taster, because these are very delicate flavors. But also, I read something in an article, I think on the website Punch, that totally resonated to me as a wine person, which was when a brewer or a winemaker, I will add, is done for the day, a long day of work, what do they open? They open a lager, something light, crisp, refreshing. They don't drink heavy red wine. They don't drink a big, huge, dark beer.
Yeah, that's true with brewers too. You'll actually find things like commercial light lager in a brewer's fridge from time to time because they're crisp and refreshing. And
wait, you mean like a Budweiser?
Yeah, well, probably not a
PBR.
Probably not a Budweiser. Yeah, more like a PBR, maybe a Rainier. I've actually been enjoying some Rainier lately. It's kind of a crisp beer, and I think the reason is it's one of those timeliness things. I mean, one of the great things about beer is that it's the diversity of flavors that you have in it. It's almost infinite, and so in any given moment, you'll have an opportunity there's a beer that will complement that. And if brewers work in very hot, very hard-working environments, when they get off, the last thing they want is something big and boozy and heavy and treacly. They want something light and crisp and refreshing. And the lightest beer out there is, like a Rainier, which is very, very, it's almost like seltzer water because it's carbonation without a ton of flavor to get in the way. So I will not name names, but I have encountered this on multiple occasions.
You mentioned Rainier, which is an old brand from the Northwest here. I love how this rise of lager is also bringing back these old labels that kind of died out. There's one in Montana called Highlander that my family was affiliated with, and I think someone purchased the label and has started making that style of beer again. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's cool again to be making these light style beers.
We're going retro.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, there's a brewery here in Oregon called Full Sail that maybe a decade ago came out with a beer called Session Beer, and it was a lager. And they made it in. It used to be typical in the 80s and earlier in the Pacific Northwest. You had these little stubby bottles, and so they found a maker of a stubby bottle and put it in that, and had the font that looked like it was maybe from the 50s or something. And they were really one of the first on that retro trend. And
those are still everywhere. I love those bottles. They're so cute.
They are so cute.
And aren't church key beers coming back now? The old school pull tab style.
Yeah, there's a company called Church Key.
Yeah.
So let's take a little break and try some lager. We can call this a session break, and tell everyone what we've been sipping while we've been sitting here. So I brought in a Czech-style Pilsner from a brewery in Astoria, Oregon called Bowie. And can you remind me what the difference is between Pilsner and lager? Lucy and Jeff. Lucy, whoever wants to go first.
Well, Pilsner is actually a kind of lager. So lagers really describe how the yeast behaves when it's fermenting. So lager yeast, like colder temperatures, they take longer to ferment. They sink to the bottom at the end of fermentation. So, Pilsners are kind of lagers, Hellas, Marzen, Oktoberfest, all of those are lagers. So we're really just talking about one subset of the lager family of beer.
So, Jeff, if you take a sip of this Pilsner, how do you know if it's a good Pilsner or not?
Well, one thing when you see the word Czech that it usually is referring to, if it's an American brewer who's making it, is a particular kind of hop that grows in the Czech Republic called Saz hops, or Zatech, if you're speaking the Czech. And it's got
one
this.
does.
Nicely done, Jeff.
While drinking beer.
It's about the only Czech word I can pronounce. I tried to learn thank you. I never really could pull it off. But it's this tangy, it's kind of a tangy, spicy quality from the hops that you may taste, and it's very characteristic. And you'll find that it's a little bit different from a German style Pilsner, which will have these more kind of herbal, delicate, somewhat flowery hops. So this is more spicy and tangy. Lucy, you want to help me out?
I'm loving the tanginess. No, that's perfect. And I really love about Pilsners that you can kind of tune into the malt. Sometimes it's crackery, grainy. I just feel like it's a nice way to sort of enjoy a malty flavor and have it be, it's so prominent compared to a lot of ales, especially IPAs that we drink in the Pacific Northwest. So enjoy that malt flavor, you guys.
All right, Erin, you're taking a sip. What do you think?
Oh, I'm really enjoying it. This is actually the first time I've had this particular kind of beer, the Bowie. But I am generally a big fan of the Breakside Pils, as I think there's always a 22 of that in our fridge, which is a little bit sweeter than this, I would say, is the overall note. But this is I think right in between the level of acidic and that slight bitterness that I can take. So
it's hitting the sweet spot for you.
Yes, by not being sweet.
Moving on for our second course, fast forward for fast casual dining. What's cooler than Olive Garden, cheaper than a steakhouse, and better than Burger King? A high-concept, so-called fast casual chain restaurant like Shake Shack, Fuku Plus, or Tender Greens are nationally known chains that might serve you a craft Pilsner with a quick pseudo-gourmet meal. Jeff Alworth, are you a fast casual consumer, and what's your take on this trend?
If we'd had this podcast a year ago, I would have no idea what you were talking about. I was ignorant of it until I did my book tour last year, and I ended up being in cities I didn't know and wandering around and looking for a place to eat. And in the downtown area of cities, you find fast casual. You don't find fast food. And I didn't even know what they were. And I walked in and I started noticing that there were these types of restaurants that had all these characteristics in common, and learned that they were called fast casual later. So they are. They look a little bit like you described it well. I think it's kind of like a fusion, but halfway between a regular restaurant and a fast food. So they have an open seating space, and you go up and order your food. And very often you're having your food prepared to order. And I noticed there's always a lot of young people in there, which may be relevant for some facts and figures we can talk about later. And the food does seem to be fresher. It's not. You don't smell the grease when you walk in. It seems to be more wholesome, and it is actually nice if you don't know the restaurant to just pop in. You almost always find at least a passable meal, and it's fast, but it seems healthy. Although my research suggests that maybe they're not all so healthy. But you have the nice illusion of healthiness.
I love that word "wholesome" that you use, because one of the reasons I love eating at these places is I feel so virtuous. Oh, I'm saving the world. I'm having this burger that wasn't made. The meat is Angus beef. It, wasn't fed hormones. So there is this element of feel good, virtuous. But really, I think what you're eating is fast food, right?
Well, I think, Jeff, you did have a good point, though. When you're on the road, you just can't bear to go into a McDonald's. And maybe it is fast food, but you do just feel a little better about yourself. If you're on a long trip, you can just pop in and get something that doesn't feel completely evil if you're going to be sitting in a rental car or an airplane all day. But Erin, we got to move this conversation your way because you have been tracking this trend for years.
For years,
yeah.
yes.
What's going on?
Oh my goodness, fast casual has been around for years, and I'm curious to know what your first experience of fast casual restaurant it was, because the most familiar one that we all know without knowing the phrase fast casual is Chipotle,
Right.
which really set the model that lots of independent chefs are now trying to copy, and what Chipotle hit on in a way that the McDonald's and the Burger Kings of the world don't, and I think which ties into the idea of wholesome and quote unquote healthy, is the idea of customization. You walk into the counter and you can put together your burrito or your bowl or what have you in whatever way you want, which allows you the control to make your own choices and thus walk out feeling slightly better about yourself that you decided to not add the sour cream or not add the cheese or do it in a way that works for you. So Chipotle set the mold. Later on, Danny Meyer and Shake Shack, which I think is one of the most successful fast casual stories. They are opening their, fun fact, 100th store. Both in the United States and internationally. And Danny Meyer was the first person to take that Steve L's Chipotle mold the next step. And you have a prominent fine dining restaurateur in New York City who's applying the same model. And he does it in, again, a very sustainable way, not only in how they source, but in how they choose to treat their employees and pay them a living wage and, again, create this product that gives you that feeling of like that great wholesome feeling when you walk into a Shake Shack and walk out, even though it's still a hamburger and it's still, it still comes with the cheese on top and all of that. But there's something about, going to a Shake Shack that feels fundamentally different than going to a Burger King, for example.
They don't even offer salads there, do they, Shake Shack?
Don't think they do. It's very burgers, hot dogs,
Burgers,
concrete.
fries.
Yeah, cheese fries.
One of the things
Have it
I
your way,
really
as long as there's not any vegetables, is that the thing? Sorry, Lucy.
That's okay. I think it's cool that this trend is inspiring, McDonald's and Wendy's and some of the more mainstream chains to change some of their practices, right? Now McDonald's is swapping out margarine for butter. It just seems like they have an awareness that there is this culture of being interested in where our ingredients come from, having fewer calories. So I think that's one interesting effect of this trend.
I would agree. And what the other interesting part of it, and I think the more recent end of fast casual development, is now you also have this second tier of very fine dining chefs. The main one being Jose Andres, who has Mini Bar in D.C. and several high-end restaurants across the country, has launched his own fast casual concept that is the anti-McDonald's. It's called Beef Steak. It is very vegetarian friendly, and if you talk to him, he says that his mission is to make vegetables sexy again. He wants people to go in and be excited to order a big, hearty bowl of vegetables for lunch and do it in a way that's a lot more accessible than if you were to go to a sit-down restaurant and order, a couple of small plates worth of vegetables. You're inherently getting that same product. It's just packaged in a way that's more efficient. And then he says, that results in we can pass that cost savings onto our customer and you can pay $9 for a vegetable lunch.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting about this sociologically. I'm always interested in if there's some kind of cultural description for a phenomenon that's happening. And what you've been describing, Erin, is it seems – so I did some research and I found out that half of the people who go to fast casual restaurants are millennials, and which really reconciles with what I was seeing, which was a lot of young people when I was in there on the road. And it seems like for a generation that has been raised with a la carte media choices, all these options, there is something that they want not only to be able to individualize the food when they walk in, but they want different fast casual experiences. The old model was you can have any kind of fast food experience as long as it's burgers or maybe tacos. There really wasn't a lot of diversity in that. But to answer your other question, the first place I went into was it was in Denver, and it was some kind of Asian bowl salad place, and it was quite healthy. And I went back there. I was in Denver for a few days, and I kept going back there every day because it was good food and it was healthy. And my experience when I walked in was like, oh, it's like Chipotle. And
was it called Shop House or something like that?
I have no idea.
I asked because Chipotle does own an Asian-ish concept, and so Denver would make complete sense if that happened to be there.
It could be.
Jeff, I like what you were saying about millennials, because I think something else that I've read about millennials, they say, is that a lot of their spending habits are determined by how good they feel about where their money's going. And the famous case is always Tom's shoes. People love Tom's because, they give a pair of shoes to someone in need for every pair you purchase. And so, right, people feel good about themselves, feel good about the earth when they're spending their money at this kind of restaurant where we are all assured that the animals are being treated humanely, we hope.
Right, and maybe the employees, too.
And maybe the employees.
But as you said, I think customization is really key to drawing in the millennials. Not only can you fix together your favorite meal, but they're also really inherently designed where you can go back to that same restaurant every day for lunch, 5 days a week, and walk out with something completely different, which caters to people's health and dietary restrictions these days, just picky personal preferences, and is just a really smart business decision for these chefs who are doing this.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like these restaurants are not going to go away anytime soon. Are you just seeing growth?
Yeah, nothing. But I mean, that's the new thing is the fine dining chef doing, not even fine dining, but just a chef doing a fast casual concept. And we joke, actually, the question you always ask is, will it scale? When someone opens a standalone pizza concept, 9 times out of 10, they're hoping that this could be spun off into more locations. It's a huge moneymaker, and often it'll help subsidize the costs of running a fine dining restaurant when margins are notoriously small. So they help they balance each other out for the owners as well.
Yeah, in terms of owning a restaurant, my understanding is that if you can have a limited service restaurant, that is people not out waiting tables, but also be turning over a lot of cheap food. Those are the most profitable, and I was reading about what are the most profitable restaurants, and they're the ones with a check between $15 and $25 rather than under $15. So a fast food restaurant, they're just not making as much money, and these fast casual restaurants are right in that sweet spot where they can charge more, but they still don't have someone coming and waiting on your table and giving you that personalized attention.
Especially if they can offer you a beer, right? That's going to just bump up the check a little bit more.
Exactly. It's brilliant. But wait, what is going on with this name? Can we come up with a better term? Because a fast food restaurant is by definition casual, right? So isn't it redundant to call it fast casual? Shouldn't we be calling it fast bourgeois or something like that?
Well, Denny Meyer actually famously calls Shake Shack fine casual, which I dislike more than fast casual.
Not there yet.
Yeah, it's a hybrid fast food and the casual restaurant, the way I think Applebee's and Ruby Tuesdays used to fill that void. And I think that's a whole different conversation, is that middle market restaurant is now really no longer part of the dining conversation the way it used to be. People don't say, oh, we're going to Sizzler. They say, we're going to Chipotle.
Yeah, well, they just don't have the branding down. Mm-hmm. I saw that Denny's has a new millennial fast casual. It's called The Den.
Yes.
And it's all about having the right logo, the right look.
Mm-hmm. Taco Bell famously tried to launch one, and its big selling point was that they served beer and alcohol, and I don't think it ended up sticking around very long. It was in Southern California, which is already a saturated taco market, but they were testing to see, can we get the millennials into a cool, hip version of Taco Bell, and I don't think it worked for them.
Well, time to wind things up with our third course, waging war on the minimum wage. While the federal minimum wage is still just $7.25 an hour, many states are implementing minimum wage hikes. Erin DeJesus, our restaurant expert, I'm going to throw this back at you. How are changing minimum wage laws affecting the restaurant industry these days?
Oh my gosh. Well, the reality is that it's a huge question, and I think everybody is definitely in wait-and-see mode right now. But to even get us to this point of what is now known as the Fight for 15 movement, which is this growing movement where fast food workers and other hospitality workers are arguing for a $15 per hour minimum wage. It's something that Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Rodham Clinton has said she will now support, is the $15 minimum. And this movement really started picking up about 18 months ago, which is McDonald's workers and other fast food workers went on strike. They actually walked out of their restaurants. They picketed McDonald's Chicago headquarters, arguing that they were not receiving a living wage. And this was clearly a gigantic problem. In many states, the minimum, as you said, is $7.25. Yes, $7.25. per hour. And if you live in a large city, even in Portland, that's just frankly not enough to live on and support a family on. So this started as a movement against, the McDonald's, the gigantic corporations of the world. But the reality is, obviously, if you up the 15 minimum across the board, this will also affect mom and pops and independent business owners who are now really struggling with how can we get our workers up to something close to $15 and have it not affect our own business and our own bottom line. So the question right now is nobody really knows. What's interesting is that our neighbor to the north, Seattle, is kind of acting as the case study for restaurants and business owners across the country right now. A few years ago, the Seattle city passed an ordinance that said that we are going to implement $15 an hour by X year, and that has started slowly rolling out. We are now at a point where starting at January of this year, some employers are paying their workers $13 an hour, and then they'll go up to $15 by next year. So we just hit the year mark on that, and people have done the studies, and you read all the articles that are coming out, and everyone's saying that they still can't tell how much this is really going to affect franchise owners and owners of fast food restaurants. So it's a giant wait-and-see game, but I think we can all agree it seems like the political climate is looking like we are going to get to $15 an hour within the next 5-10 years, maybe? I don't know.
Oh, 10 years sounds so far away. I'm thinking of these fast food workers especially. I read somewhere that fast food workers earn an average of $8.90 an hour. And, it's just got to be so hard if you think about their commutes and, raising a family. It's got to be so hard. So I'm hoping for the $15 movement to really, gain momentum. And let's start paying these workers so they can make a living wage.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting experiment. We're going to find out a lot. Restaurants already run on a pretty tight margin. So if you raise and one of the big expenses is labor. So if you raise that cost quite a bit, it means you're going to have to raise the price of food for sure. There's no way the math doesn't work out. So then you're running a twin sociological experiment to find out if people are still going to go out to eat as often. And if they don't, then does that mean that some percentage of the restaurants fail? And there's all these kind of cascading effects that we can't predict because we don't know how people are going to respond to this. So it is interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
It sounds like some restaurants are already raising prices a little bit. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but, in anticipation of these rising wages, whether they're going to be voluntary or not, restaurants are going for it, I think probably to experiment and sort of see what's going to happen.
It's that old chicken and egg question in economics. The question is, if we raise the minimum wage, will jobs disappear? I don't know. But it seems like people are willing to pay higher prices, at least in Seattle and at the restaurants, Lucy, that you were mentioning. Of course, Seattle's an extremely strong economy right now.
Yeah. That's right.
Good point.
If we do a national $15 minimum wage, it's very different if you're living in a rural town versus a city. And here in the state of Oregon, we raised our own minimum wages and set tiers. So in the rural areas, the minimum wage is lower than it is in the city. And that's one. So again, based on thought about how people will respond and how this stuff will work, the state of Oregon made the decision to do tiers, but I don't think anybody knows. I think it's one of those things where food is relatively expensive when you look at the amount of money we spend on we spend on food relative to our income has really been dropping when you go back to the 20s or something. Housing was way cheaper and food was way more expensive. So there are trends that shift. It would be great if one of us was an oracle and could say what will happen.
Well, I want to get back to something you mentioned, Lucy, which is that a lot of people are trying to support families on minimum wage fast food jobs these days, which wasn't the case, 20, 30 years ago. It was teenagers working at fast food restaurants. And today, with manufacturing jobs disappearing or having disappeared already, more and more people are trying to support a whole family on these tiny incomes. And it does seem like what you're saying is true, Jeff. Our whole economy needs to kind of take this huge shift, and we all need to start to accept that food needs to be more expensive. What do you think, Erin?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as Lucy just mentioned, independent restaurants have been playing with this more, and the patrons of those restaurants, it seems like, at least anecdotally, are a little more willing to to do that, to provide more for their servers and their cooks and the people who are working very hard to present this meal on the table. The difference is the person who is going to a McDonald's and is used to paying $4.99 for a value meal. I haven't been to a McDonald's in forever, but I'm assuming they don't have a tip jar at the counter the way they even do in Starbucks, where you can throw in an extra $1 if you feel so inclined. To them, that's, 20% increase if they were to raise prices on that. So those are the people where I think the larger conversations need to happen with. Like, ethically speaking, are you willing to I guess, give more in order to support someone else and end up, with a little less money in your pocket at the end of the day?
One tangential, I don't want to get too far off topic, but have you all read about the problems with the scheduling software? Do you know what I'm talking about? With
Starbucks.
I think Starbucks did alter that somewhat, but a lot of these chains, these national chains, they're trying to make as big a profit as possible, and they have this scheduling software that sort of predicts one day in advance how many people they need at what hours to make the most money, basically. And these poor people who, have small children, they'll end up, it's called clopening, where they close at 11 p.m. and they open at 4 a.m. and they have to figure out what to do with their little kids, and they're only making $7.25 an hour or whatever. And it just sounds like a total nightmare. So, yeah, I'm excited about this movement that, these folks, they work hard. It's a huge percentage of the people on minimum wage are in service jobs and restaurant jobs. And I feel like they've just been kind of overlooked, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens.
It's something like 40% of the people who work in hospitality are at the poverty level, which is shocking.
Wow.
And I just wanted to throw in here, too, the $15 minimum is also a completely different argument than the tipped minimum, which is something that service workers at quote-unquote nicer, maybe not chain restaurants, contend with. Essentially, if you're a waiter or waitress, you get a different minimum wage than the $7.25. In many states, it has remained at $2.13 an hour. And supposedly what's supposed to happen is, if there's a slow shift and there's a snowstorm and you have no customers, your employer is supposed to make up that difference and then thus pay you $7.25 an hour. Obviously, for the workers, you don't have a guaranteed income at any time, which is so hard, to plan a life around. If you're not sure, what you're going to take home at the end of the day, and that's a completely different discussion that's happening in the labor movement, where we need to up that either $2.13 to something reasonable or abolish it entirely and put everyone at the same minimum wage.
That is shocking.
Yes. And some restaurants are getting rid of tipping. I know that's another topic, but I think it's interesting that they're considering a totally different model so that workers are really supported and, make a living wage that they can rely on.
I think it's time to go around and share some dessert. I'll go first. I don't know if you all have heard of the novel Sweet Bitter. It came out in late spring. It's set in a restaurant very similar to Union Square Cafe in New York, which is a Danny
Meyer restaurant.
Danny Meyer restaurant. Okay, I was like, I hope I got that right. And it's written from the perspective of a 22-year-old who moved to the Big Apple with hopes and dreams and gets sucked into the excitement of working as a waitress at this glamorous restaurant. And I have to admit, I only got maybe a third of the way through it, and I had to put it down. So I'm sort of curious to hear what our listeners think of it if they have delved into this book. It's super interesting to kind of see sort of the inside, the guts of a restaurant like this, see how it works behind the scenes. And, of course, there are all the people up all hours doing drugs and all that exciting stuff. But so far, this book really doesn't have a plot other than this. This woman has this exciting job and has a crush on the bartender. So
is it based on, is it a memoir? Is it her life story or?
Yeah, it's a novel,
okay.
But it's based on her experience coming to New York and, working her way up in the restaurant world. Yes.
Interesting.
So you're not going to finish this book, it sounds like, Catherine.
Not unless a listener writes in and tells me I have to. I don't know.
There could be a juicy romance coming up. I mean, who knows?
I need a plot. I need a really compelling plot to keep moving forward.
Fair enough.
There's so many books in the world. It's hard to justify reading when you don't enjoy, right?
Yep.
So that was a kind of a lame dessert. Erin, do you have anything better for us?
I hope so. And it'll be most relevant to listeners in the Portland area or visitors to Portland. One of my new favorite places in town right now is a restaurant called Han Oak. I don't know if any of you have been. It's been open for, gosh, I don't know. I'll say a year, but I could be completely making that up. But it's a restaurant by Chef Peter Cho, who cooks these excellent prefix Korean meals for both brunch and dinner. But the one thing I love about it the most is that it's this really unique space that you enter, and it's essentially an open courtyard where it just seems like there is someone's excellent backyard dinner party happening at all times. And they're always inviting chefs to pop up and do these one-off dinners. And they did this crazy Korean thing where they were cooking on logs, and it's just an ongoing party there. And I feel like it's a sort of space where you'll walk in on any given night and it'll be something completely different. So it's something that has landed on Eater's Best New Restaurants of the Year list for 2016. And if you have not been, I would absolutely recommend checking it out.
When are we going to go, Erin?
I'm game. I'm game.
sold.
Whenever you want to.
Do they serve lager?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
All right. We're in. How about you, Jeff? What do you have for us?
Well, when I saw that we were going to talk about lager today, it reminded me of a beer I had recently and kind of a trend that I'm seeing that's for maybe a little bit nerdy, so you'll have to bear with me. There's a beer that's made by a brewery in Montana called Dump Truck. The brewery's called Bayern. And it is a traditional, totally classic lager in the box style, but they've dry hopped it, which is when you float hops in after it's fermented and it's just sitting there, you put hops in it and it steeps and it only draws out the aroma. No bitterness, no flavor, just the aroma. So it scents the beer. It's a really typical procedure in American and English breweries, but Germans have never done it, and they certainly have never done it with American hops. So this beer had this amazing Citra it was named because it's very citrusy, but it had even almost more of an orange blossom aroma. And then it had this classic German clear malty flavor. And it was kind of like a synesthesia thing for me. I couldn't believe I was tasting a German beer. And the brewer there is a German, very born and trained, and moved to America after he'd been a brewer for a while. And I'm seeing other breweries do this stuff from German Americans who have their own breweries. Like there's a brewery in St. Louis called Urban Chestnut, and the Bavarian trained brewer there is also getting into some of this kind of stuff. And even in Germany now, they're starting to tinker with dry hopping. And I have seen that the hop growers in Hallertau are promoting dry hopping because it's a way to sell more hops. So that's good for them. So this could be a fascinating trend, and I think it really might make people who think of German beers as a little too boring, might draw them in, and I'm kind of interested and excited about that beer.
I want to try that beer.
All right, Lucy, how about you?
Well, last week I was in New York City, and I had the chance to go to a restaurant I've been wanting to go to since it opened 3 years ago. It's called Luxus or Luxus. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced. It's in Brooklyn, and they serve one beverage and one beverage only. You guys might be able to guess what it is. I loved it. It was beer. And you go through this beer bar. It has marble countertops to a back little room with just 16 seats. And the chef, Daniel Burns, is right there. He makes a tasting menu, and you can get beer pairings with it. And it was just an extraordinary experience. So I highly recommend this place if you guys happen to be in Brooklyn. Yeah, it was great.
Only in Brooklyn.
Everybody's going to go to Brooklyn soon, right?
I guess
the whole world goes to Brooklyn these days.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. A special thanks to our awesome panelists, Eater.com reports editor Erin DeJesus.
Thanks, Catherine.
Beverage author and podcaster Jeff Alworth.
Thank you.
And certified Cicerone and travel and beer writer Lucy Burningham.
Thanks for having me.
You guys are terrific. Hey, folks, please pull up a chair to our table and savor the conversation with us. You can subscribe to The Foretop on iTunes or however you get your podcasts. At facebook.com/TheForetop, you can suggest topics for us to discuss, after you like our page, of course. And tweet us, please, at @4top, all one word. Today's show was recorded at Oregon Public Broadcasting in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. Our show editor and co-producer is Alex Ward. Special thanks to audio engineer Hakeem Hasworth, and our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. I hope you can join us for our next episode, and please tell your friends about The Foretop and give us some loving feedback in iTunes. Ciao!
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Did anyone leave a tip?